The Heart of the Artist is a book. There are two books that I will recommend to you today. And The Heart of the Artist is a book that I have used in leading communities of artists for over 20 years. My spouse, who was a worship leader for 20 years, he's now on our voice faculty. He's always had one foot in the classical world and one foot in ministry. He introduced me to the book as he was leading teams of artists in the church, and I have led teams of artists outside of the church. There are many things that translate directly regarding artist temperament, resultant behaviors, problematic situations, and solutions. We can just be a little bit more biblical when we're dealing with a ministry context than I could be directly in my public school classroom, but I still utilized biblically based principles to help move our community forward with a common vision and to problem solve. So this book is wonderful, so worthwhile. It's been around for a very long time. The first edition, I've always worked from the first edition. I just bought the second edition to compare it because my first edition is packed in a box. I'm moving offices right now at Baylor. And the second edition does not have as fully a fleshed out code of ethics section. So I would recommend to you, look for our first edition if you can find it. I loved that resource. Yeah. Author is Rory Noland. And you'll see Rory's name in the PowerPoint as we move forward. But it's R-O-R-Y, and then Noland as you would expect it to be spelled. So that's a book, and then there's another book that is not biblically based, but it is a very interesting study in group psychology and performance psychology. There is a book called Belonging, the Ancient Code of Togetherness, and this is a book that looks at two different culture streams. The author is, and I always get his name wrong, so I'll wait until it shows up in the PowerPoint because I've convinced myself he has a different name. That's the one I always remember, and it's never right. I always think Owen Park, or Owen Wilson, the actor. So we'll see what his name is. I never remember, I should. I never find myself able to read on flights, and I found myself on a transatlantic flight. And I never buy books at the airport, but I thought, I'm going to try something new. I'm going to buy a book at an airport, and I'm going to read it. And I like to use things that are that I think are useful in terms of my own personal development. The book is written, and I didn't know what I was picking up, but I have found it to be very useful. Again, you need to read things through the lens of your own personal faith, because his explanations for certain things are rooted in like evolution and our evolution in terms of survival. And so for me, I always just frame it through a biblical perspective, but some of the principles that he presents are profoundly impactful in terms of understanding group behavior. There's a lot of evaluation of teams. So the author of that resource is half Maori, which these are the people who are native to New Zealand, and half British. So he's lived in both a collectivist society and then also in a capitalist society, and understands them both and speaks to the differentiations and draws on his experiences to share principles of teamwork, which in certain societies, if you're in a tribe, then you are reliant on one another to survive. And so there are many principles that are useful from that book. And we'll look at a couple of things, but I would encourage you to read those. Not that you have time. And if you're going to only get one, buy this one, The Heart of the Artist. Sure. Belonging, the Ancient Code of Togetherness. It's interesting. He calls it the Ancient Code. Well, we all know that God coded us for relationships. We learn about that in Genesis, right? God makes the sun, the light, and says it is good. He makes the trees and says they are good. He makes the fill in the blank and says it is good. He makes the man and says it is good. And it is not good to be alone. It is not good. So it's coded into us. The ancient code of togetherness, that author doesn't say God coded us, but he says that we are coded for a relationship, which is true. Okay, so we are designed for community. And what's so cool is God is a community in his own identity, right? He's three things, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This is something that I don't know that I'll ever totally understand, but I have great faith in this concept. So when we think about being made in God's image, well, God is in community, and the Spirit speaks on our behalf to the Father. And so there's a communication, a community that's built into God, and we reflect that design. And so we see in Genesis that God says it is not good for man to be alone. Now, this waka papa concept is a concept that is born out of Maori culture, and this is finding your, and this is something that comes out of the resource belonging. This is from that resource, the Ancient Code of Togetherness. This is finding, it's similar to Ubuntu, if you've heard of that term. It's deriving our value from how we serve other people. Not how many likes I have, how many followers I have on Instagram. That's not my value, but it's in what I can do to help my fellow people in my community. And then finally, the differences that we share, and this is also from belonging and ancient code together, the differences can be the seedbed of our strength rather than something to diminish. So when we think about, and this is all within the context, it's certainly about leadership, and there are principles that we'll talk about today. And please, any of these things that either strike a nerve, if you think, I'm really struggling with this right now in my own community, maybe it's a culture of complaining, let's talk about it. And I'm sure that there are people in this room that at least can say, I see you, and face the same thing. And we know that that's an empowering thing to be seen and to be known and understood. But there also might be people who've had some strategies that they've effectively utilized to circumvent perhaps these things taking root and becoming what I'll call a bitter root or a poisonous root in our cultures. Let's talk about our response to differences when we meet somebody who might be different. Oh, in Eastwood, I told you, it's not Owen Wilson. It's that other guy. Clint Eastwood. Oh, now I can remember it. Clint Eastwood and Owen Wilson fused. Okay. So this is a chapter, so he's talking about human behavior in group psychology. And he's made his life as a sports psychologist. When a team is dysfunctional, they bring him in, and he needs to discern what is the heart of dysfunction in this culture. Why is this team not functioning well? And then help prescribe solutions. So this is his work. There are lots of recordings of him speaking on YouTube. You can find him, but he's a sports psychologist. But as I said, brings a unique perspective because he comes from two vastly different backgrounds. As an extension, he's talking about our inbuilt radar. This is innate. As an extension of this inbuilt radar, an uncomfortable truth is that when we see difference, our automatic and unconscious internal stress system is activated within 50 milliseconds. Seconds later, the reasoning, the logical regions of our brain get an opportunity to either confirm or deny the anxiety. Depending on the belief system we've developed in our own lives, our prejudgment will either dissolve away or stick. There's another interesting passage that he later talks about in the book when we have groups of people that are coming together for the first time, and they don't know one another, within 3 seconds, people can identify a hierarchy. Within 3 seconds. Whether or not it is conscious, it's really, really remarkable, these things. And a lot of it is unconscious, right? So this is where it's so important when we look at, depending on the belief system we've developed in our lives, it's either maintained or it dissolves. It's a fascinating thing. So let's see what God has to say about this. This is a lot of reading. It's a long one. I know you know this scripture, but it's pretty incredible. There's one body, but it has many parts. But all its many parts make up one body. It's the same with Christ. We're all baptized by one Holy Spirit, and so we are formed into one body. It didn't matter whether we were Jews or Gentiles, slaves or free people, we were all given the same Spirit to drink. So the body is not made up of just one part, it has many parts. Suppose the foot says, I love this part, where the writer animates the body parts as if they're persons. Suppose the foot says, I am not the hand, I don't belong in the body. I'm just not a good enough singer, I don't belong in a choir. Right? I'm not gifted. By saying this, it cannot stop being a part of the body. And suppose the ear says, I'm not an eye, so I don't belong to the body. By saying this, it cannot stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, would it hear? If the entire body were an eye, would it hear? Does it work very well when the eye tries to hear? Does it work very well when the ear tries to see? Or the toe tries to taste? Doesn't work. Doesn't work. God has placed each part in the body just as he wanted it to be. If all the parts are the same, how could there be a body? As it is, there are many parts, but there's only one body. We keep coming back to that idea that there's one body. The eye can't say to the hand, I don't need you. The head can't say to the feet, I don't need you. How exciting would life be if I were only just a head on a pedestal? I'd be stuck there forever. In fact, it's just the opposite. The parts of the body that seem to be weaker are the ones we can't do without. Anybody been sick and lost some capacity and then realized how much you need that capacity? And it goes away, and then you're thankful. Like for me, anytime the dreaded stomach virus comes along, I forget how good I feel most of the time. And when I am just dying with this stomach virus, I long for the days when I used to feel good. And then the day that you get through the thing and the sun comes out of the clouds, you go, oh, I feel amazing. Right? I don't say that every single day. It's only through the trial that I find that space. Let's see. God has put together all the parts of the body. He has given more honor to the parts that didn't have any. All of them will take care of one another. If one part, this is really important, if one part suffers, every part suffers. I think about this even in my own marriage, right? Like that with a relationship, whether it's a spouse or a child, or someone with whom we're very close, maybe it's a friend, that when our lives are interconnected, when one of us is not healthy, it often impacts the other person. So really trying to think about ourselves more collectively and to know that when someone on our team is not doing well, that it impacts all of us. And when someone is thriving, it overflows and impacts all of us. Okay, I have a little homework for you. Choose 3 adjectives, and don't think about this too much. Just what comes to mind first. 3 adjectives, you can just say them aloud. When I say the word artist, just start saying them while I hunt down some water. What are words that you associate? Creative, okay, that's our home run. What else? Say that again.
Paint.
Okay.
I thought you said
Pain. But I think that that's a plausible
suggestion. What else? Imaginative. Good.
Expressive.
I can give you my water bottle. Can you get me something to fill it up? Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Maria. Okay, I'm sure you all came up with some really great suggestions. What were some of the words that I missed?
Did someone say movie? Yes, I like where we're going with this. Selfish, good. Egotistical, drama. What else? Expression. Emotion. Oh, yeah. Colorful. Necessary. Visionary. Sensitive. Outside the lines. Communication. Say that again. Blessed. I am blessed right now. Thank you. Water appears. I am still recovering. I was sick for 2 weeks and had no voice, and I'm still not quite 100%. And I've been talking way too much this week, and it's so been worth it. But my voice is now ready to rest. Okay, so I love that we have shared both sides of being an artist. And we know that any strength is also a liability, right? Any strength is also a liability. So let's do a little bit of a survey. How many of you are familiar with the term melancholic? Right? Yeah, we know that. So the ancient Greeks decided that there are 4 main personality types: choleric, sanguine, phlegmatic, and melancholic. Do you know what those words mean? Do you have a working knowledge? Okay, choleric is Martha. Martha is choleric. These people get things done. They work. They're in charge. Like, when I think about, they're often leaders, sometimes controlling, right? That grandpa that swore a lot, he was choleric. Sanguine. What does sanguine mean?
Like optimism in negative situations.
Yes. Life of the party. They're extroverts, outgoing, positive, can be flighty. They self-efface. Yeah, so sanguine is that archetype. And then phlegmatic, so grandpa was choleric, grandma was phlegmatic. Phlegmatic is even keel, passive, not direct. Often on the surface seems peaceful, but maybe not inside. And then melancholic, when you see the word melancholic, what stirs within you when you think about that melancholy? Mm-hmm. Sadness, anything else? Withdrawn. Mm-hmm. Reflective, thoughtful, good. Good. So in the Middle Ages, melancholy was considered a physical disorder. I promise you'll feel better about yourselves in a few slides. And the church regarded it as a sin. Now remember what I said. There are strengths and liabilities to all of our strengths, right? Liabilities to all of our strengths. In the Renaissance, this capacity, and Aristotle identified all of the brightest thinkers, the innovators, as melancholic. He defined that. He identified. But in the Middle Ages, it's not cool, it's not in vogue to be a melancholy person. In fact, you are a sinner if you are. In the Renaissance, capacity for rare accomplishment made the melancholic temperament quite fashionable, right? This is where we prize genius, where it becomes something to be seen. And oftentimes, and this is still true today, in some instances, that the bad behavior that goes along with being an artist is considered just a part of being an artist, right? Like John, now he just got a consequence. So John Elliott Gardner punched somebody backstage. He's now lost his job But there was a time when a conductor could throw a music stand and it was acceptable. Those days are over. And I've never thrown a music stand myself. In the Romantic period, there emerges this concern for people with melancholic tendencies. So just like aesthetic, we have a sort of a pendulum of extremes. So let's just see in the year 1586, as I said, you'll feel better in a few slides. This is going to be the toughest one. Okay, these are the words associated with melancholy: suspicious, given to fearful and terrible dreams, in affection, sad, full of fear, hardly moved to anger, but keeping it long, not easy to be reconciled, envious and jealous, apt to take occasions in the worst parts, sighing, sobbing, lamentation, countenance, demise, and hanging down, blushing and bashful, of pace slow, silent, negligent, refusing the light and frequency of men, delighted more and solitariness and obscurity. Okay, we'll move on from that. That's a physicist speaking about melancholy. And he has filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom and understanding and knowledge and all manner of workmanship, to design artistic works, to work in gold and silver and bronze, and cutting jewels for setting, and carving wood, and to work in all manner of artistic workmanship. What's the first thing that we see God doing in Scripture? Yeah, he doesn't just create for a moment, he creates. He goes on a creating binge, right? He creates for days on end. And not just creation function, but also for form. God creates things of beauty. Somebody just said to me last night, I was talking with one of our students who just graduated, Ashley, formerly known as Ashley Adams, now Ashley Reichert. And she was talking about how in Genesis there's a distinguishing line when God creates the trees and talks about they were beautiful, that there's an attention to beauty. And when we walk out the door in this fallen world, this gray version of what God created originally, we see his fingerprints everywhere in the structure of a leaf, in the shape of a cedar tree, in the infinite beauty of a butterfly. We were in Mackinac, Ireland last week with my children and went into a butterfly house. And I have small kids, and so to watch these butterflies landing on my children, who I think are exquisite creations, even though they're sometimes naughty, I see the fingerprints of God there, but to see the beauty and the detail in the wings of these butterflies, it's just astonishing. So just imagine when we're not in a fallen world, but we see throughout Scripture that artistry is a reflection of God's character, who he is. Look at all of the ways that we see arts in Scripture. We see it manifesting in so many realms, and many that I have not even listed here. So many passages about music and dance, and we know that David was a man after God's own heart. That's a phrase that we associate with David. And David is the absolute picture of an artist, right? He's a deep feeler. Okay, now let's talk about leaders. So we sort of gave our analysis of artists. What are the things that come to mind when you think about leaders? What are words that emerge? Visionary, organized, decisive, courageous, great, strong, good, guidance, good. Say that again. Servant. What was? Stephead. Good. Anything else? Listener. Good leaders. Say it again. Worker. Caring. Proactive. Servant. Facilitator. It's really wonderful to hear all of your descriptions of leadership, because it's very clear to me that you all have a clear picture of what a good leader looks like. there are words that we associate with leadership. Well, how much crossover did we find in our pool of descriptors between artist and leader?
Visionary.
We heard visionary. Was there anything else where there was crossover? I think the only one that I heard was visionary. But it's pretty clear that we've sort of got these two identities in different camps, right? They're bifurcated, they're separated. And how many of us begin our lives as artists and find ourselves as leaders? Whether it is accidental or chosen, we find ourselves doing things that require skills of us that may not be innate, may be innate. It's too monochromatic for us to think all artists are one way or all leaders are one way. I don't mean to simplify things. That's not the case. But when we think about sort of these generalizations, there are separations in our mind, and then also in the reality of the fact that we have both and. Now, when I was a kid, I have an older sister who is now my best friend. She is 16 months older than me, and if any of you have been a child in such close proximity to a sibling or have children in such close proximity, you know they fight. And so my sister and I fought all the time when we were kids. And she teased me because it bothered me. I was very, very sensitive. And she called me Sensitivo. That was her name. See, I told you we were Italian. Hey, Sensitivo, she called me that. And it made me so frustrated. But she was right. And I always thought it was a deficiency of mine. I thought I was way too sensitive. Things bothered me way too much. And I took too much to heart. And I remember reading an article that was really life-changing, where the author was talking about how someone had looked into their life and made it very clear to them that that sensitivity was absolutely essential to their identity and absolutely essential to their purpose. That our sensitivity as artists is absolutely critical, pivotal, necessary, germane to our ability to create. It is also the thing that makes us incredibly vulnerable. And the moment where we start to build walls because that vulnerability becomes too hard, then we lose some of our capacity as artists, I believe. And so when we're leaders, we have to be able to take a certain amount of arrows, don't we? When we're leading people, when we have that privilege of leadership, we stand and make ourselves vulnerable every single time that we choose to lead people. And sometimes there are legitimate reasons for us to be criticized, and I put myself at the front of that line and at the top of that stack. But I also have to be mindful that I never lose my capacity to be sensitive. Does that make sense? Oh, furry little bunny, there's another, all these little tiny people are coming up. So let's look at, all these things are just really fast little Google searches, but if you just look up words that are associated with leader, these are the things that came up. We think about left brain cognition. When we think about artistry, what side do we think about? Right brain, so we have this differentiation in the hemispheres. Data-driven. Planning, strategizing, problem solving, logical, ordered, linear, confident, driven, dynamic, extrovert. Not true of every leader. 50% of us are introverts. There are fabulous leaders on both sides of the aisle. So these are some of the sort of, like when we talked about melancholy, and I'll say these sweeping generalizations. These are sweeping generalizations about what it means to be a leader. So when we talk about the liabilities of these two identities and how they intersect, the demands of leadership can sometimes stifle artistry. So this is connected, this idea of us having to build some kind of wall up to survive, right? Sometimes when we're going through a tough season or things aren't necessarily functioning healthfully for our team, we have to do this. And that can sometimes stifle our artistry. Oh man, I feel so seen by this point. The administration of the job can eclipse the artistic creative part of the job. So little of my job is music making. And I get to do a whole lot of music making that is magnificent, but so little of my job is music making. So much of my job is email, darn it. Right? Making sure that I'm serving the people who need information. I mean, it's just so much of our responsibility. Sometimes it can feel like these two identities are in conflict with one another. And sometimes they are. And sometimes we have to lean into one more so than the other in different moments. Okay, so when we talk about servant leadership, I think you brought this up. I would like to recommend, I need to start like getting a little link so I get commissions for these recommendations. I'm just kidding. Ramona Wiss, the last name is W-I-S, wrote a book called The Choral Conductor as Servant Leader. It's outstanding. There's also, I think if you just Google choral servant leadership. Have you read it, William? Or are you aware? Oh, okay, got it. We do give it to our conducting students here. There's an article that is much smaller that Ramona wrote about being a choral conductor and being a servant leader. It's a wonderful resource, so I would recommend that to you if you'd like to have some tangible principles associated with it. I think most of us who serve others are familiar with this phrase, servant leader. In Rory's book, Rory outlines some bullet points about what it means to be a servant leader. And again, they're much more, they're just more exhaustively explained than I will, but I'll give you the bullet points that be gentle and sensitive. So when we're a servant leader, and this goes back to the sensitivity that is so innate to musicians, that when we're leading artists, we do need to be gentle and sensitive. It doesn't mean that we don't need to be strong, but there needs to be a gentleness and sensitivity to our strength. We love people. We exhort them and we encourage them. I just want to do a little bit of a departure here and just ask you a bit about your practice for encouragement. Do any of you have any structures that you've built or have in place to attend to this concept of encouragement to your team members? So let me just give an example of what it looks like in my classroom. I've done an activity, and I wouldn't expect any of you to do this because I know how busy things are, so it's going to be a different vernacular for you. But I might have a chair in the middle of a circle, and everybody on the outside of the circle has a yellow sticky notepad, and they write one encouraging word to the person in the middle of the circle anonymously, and walk up and hand that sticky note. The whole exercise for one person takes about 2 minutes, and that person walks away with a stack of encouragement from the people in the ensemble, and they walk away and get to keep that, and they do that for one another. Anybody have a structure that they utilize? Sorry about that. She switched schools. She wrote him a beautiful letter about all the good she saw in him. And my goodness, what a powerful lesson for me to observe my own child receive that in the power of words coming from someone. My son didn't write her a letter back, but I got to watch his face. And for him to feel, my son is a beautiful soul who is sometimes a problem. And so he gets himself into some scrapes. And to hear something good meant a lot. And so I'm sure your people felt that and felt so seen and loved by that. Beautiful. Anyone else have a Anybody else have a structure or a practice?
Yeah, in regards to like practice now with my choirs, usually if there's a song that may be a little bit more difficult than usual, and during a rehearsal they may feel like that all this hard work is to feel like they won't get it done. I always tell them at the end of that particular song or whatever, thank you so much for working very hard on this song, because it will mean a lot once we finish at the end, and you'll be grateful for the work that we've done. I usually never do negatives. I always tell them thank you for your hard work.
Great, great, great. Yeah.
I try to follow up with MacMullen, when we had a Sunday where there's just always things going on that follow up later in the day, like, hey guys, thank you for serving us.
Great, just a simple I see you or a text. Great, really wonderful. Anyone else?
When I was in full-time ministry, I was music director for the choir, and if you weren't there, I was the next morning, missing sign up for the envelope.
Oh, cool.
Quick and
So they know it matters when I'm not there. I'm seen and valued. Anyone else? Anyone else?
handwritten birthday cards.
Great. Handwritten birthday cards. How many of you, oh, sorry.
When my choir is receiving instruction from me and they accomplish it, I jump. I celebrate. I'm like a cheerleader.
Yes.
And one time my youth choir member told his mother, we had rehearsal, but Packwood didn't jump once. So I had to remember, always jump at least once.
I love that. And we see that example in David, where he is willing to become undignified.
Yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. Anyone else? So, when we think about our own lives, have you had experiences where a leader encouraged you and it had a profound impact on you? Anyone have an experience like that? Anybody want to share an experience where they've had that happen?
In sixth grade, I accidentally got into choir. It wasn't like my intention. But we switched zones in the district, and I was forced to be in. And at the end of the year, we were doing this program at our school, and we were doing choreography, and I kind of halfway didn't want to do it. But at the same time, I did it just to kind of put all my energy into it, and my choir teacher was like, yeah, good job, keep doing that. And for some reason, that little moment decided for me, just, you know what, maybe I should keep doing this for like a couple of years or so, and the next thing you know, here I am.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Don't underestimate your importance and power in speaking good into people's lives. I have a teacher friend who every single rehearsal, she has a different person that she chooses to have an intentional contact with so that she makes sure she sees everybody. There are always going to be musicians in our ensembles and in our spheres that just are always like, hey, see me. Do you see me? And then there are those people who have rich depth to share, but they are not as comfortable being at the forefront. And sometimes it's easy to miss that. And so I like this way, even if it feels structured and perhaps not organic, it helps her to make sure she's connecting with every person in the ensemble. And so that the people who maybe aren't seen don't see that, oh, this person always gets the attention. And we have hogs and logs in our environments, right? So just being aware of those things. So important to take the time to encourage people. So let's talk about just briefly about self-care, building a structure to practice your own art. When we are inspired, it overflows to the people with whom we work. How many of you don't have to raise your hands, but can imagine a time where there was an artist leader in front of you and their inspiration was absolutely contagious, and you were so deeply impacted by how much they loved something, even if it wasn't your jam. You bought the ice, right? Even though you could make your own ice, right? It's like those things where we just believe someone. Identify modes to invest in the spiritual lives of your artists. So we all are going to have different vernaculars and languages that we speak. Some of us are going to have a really easy time being an encourager. My primary love language is words of affirmation, and so it's a way that I express easily. I'm not a gift giver, but that might make a difference to somebody who is in my sphere. And so trying to know your people, and we all know the 5 love languages, this wonderful resource that helps us have sort of languages. Maybe it's quality time, maybe there's a team member that would really feel seen if you sat down and had a cup of coffee with them, or had an intentional interaction, or just gave them a phone call. Hey, just checking in on you. I know you had a stressful event last week at work. All of those things matter. So can we identify modes to invest in spiritual lives? And then perhaps identify areas where you need to exert more leadership. And this is something that I'm constantly chasing. So we'll talk a little bit about complaining and grumbling, but typically complaining and grumbling is actually helpful to us because it can signal where problems are either emergent or existent, and it can communicate to us where we need to lean in a little bit more as a leader. So there was a scenario this year that I became aware of through someone's complaining, and I realized, there was some student leadership that was sort of managing a topic, and I realized I need to step in here and be more engaged with this topic so that it can hopefully address the situation. If the complaint hadn't emerged, then I maybe would not have known about it, and the problem would have become exacerbated. But because the complaint existed, it actually made me thankful for the complaint, though my first instinct is to be defensive. Always, right? And so that's why it's really important to just pause, take a breath, that cleansing breath, breathe in Yahweh. Breathe the Lord in again until He has cleared your senses, and you realize, oh, this is helpful. This is helpful. There's a great little article by Harvard Business Review about complaining and grumbling, and it's talking about customers. What do you do with the complaints of your customers? Lots of good information. They differentiate the types of complaints, and for us as leaders, we have to assess, is this complaining rooted in this person as a complainer? And there are, how many of you might have worked with somebody, maybe could have possibly worked with someone like that in your life? Yeah. But all behavior is communication. All behavior is communication. So that person is communicating something to you, right? They're teaching you something about them. All right. So try to identify the areas where you need to exert more leadership. Okay, so, how am I doing on time? All right, let's see. I'll let you read this quietly, just so I can rest my voice. Doesn't that sound like a nice place to be? A place where the arts are flourishing, where God is using artistic expression in a powerful way, where we can connect in meaningful ways with other artists. Rory does a beautiful job in the book of describing historical communities of artists, where artists were inspired by one another's work. These colonies of artists, these composers that came together and had house concerts, where they were inspired and challenged by the work of one another, and how that impacted their artistry. For us, when we have the privilege of working with other artists, if we reflect back to this idea of the body of Christ and how we need others, how we can find inspiration in our fellow artists, rather than compete with fellow artists, which is a very common human choice to make. If we're not making music and artistry for the glory of God. So let's talk about what kills teamwork. Rory talks about this quite a bit. I'm sure that you've never had any of these things rear their beautiful heads in your environments. Selfishness, grumbling and complaining, competitive spirit, unresolved conflict. Any of those stand out to anyone in particular in terms of something that you have worked with in your own practice?
Grumbling and
Complaining. Does anybody have a creative way that they address complaining?
It's not so creative, I don't think, but I acknowledge it first and foremost to go, you know what, I have feeling you feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, we know this is a bigger picture, even if it's not what you like, what we're going to do like next week, or something to that effect. Just most of the time acknowledging that if they have this problem, really push the fire.
I love that. There's a great Brene Brown quote about owning our stories. And if we deny it, then it can take control. But if we own it, then we can write a better story that follows. And so for you to acknowledge that, it takes great courage and humility. And sometimes people just want to be heard. Sometimes they just want to be seen. There's somebody in my life that does like to complain, and sometimes I interpret it as this person just wants to have a little time with me. And so I give them some time and try to redirect their thoughts. Yeah. Anyone else? Anything speak to you, or something that you've experienced and feel like you found some victory in addressing? Yeah.
Competitive spirit. I had a former music minister stay in the church, and I just had to talk with them and say, I know you feel like you're helping, or that it was not easy to come through that. And they didn't stay much longer, maybe another year, but I think they finally realized that it had to be changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think so. This is when we looked at those artist leader categories. This is the component of leadership that requires courage to have difficult conversations and also to open yourself up for criticism or being vulnerable. And sometimes we can only control ourselves. We can't control how people respond, but by addressing it directly and with a person, you're doing the right thing.
It helped me realize for myself that I knew what was going on. It wasn't, they weren't fooling me or trying to,
Yeah. Yes.
so they knew that whatever, it would come back somehow.
Sure. Sure. Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else? Yeah.
I think we as artists, leaders, are sometimes guilty of these same things, and we need to be aware
Yes.
of how we handle that in our maturity, so that we don't let them fester in us, grumbling, complaining, competitive spirit, other staff members, unresolved conflicts.
It's so, I can't remember where I heard this, but I remember reading, the people who are at church need church. Right? And that includes us. Like, we need church. We need forgiveness. We need to ask for God's guidance. We need to be humble with one another. Unresolved conflict. I will say that this is a big thing that can be long-lived and have devastating consequences. Unresolved conflict. And that takes courage and often takes the help of more than one person. So this is in that original book. Rory talks about the development of a code of ethics for your community. So I did this with my classrooms. I do it with my classrooms, where I charge the membership with defining our expectations of one another in anticipation of dysfunction. Okay, anytime I go in front of a group of artists, I anticipate that they're sinful people, myself included. Like, I'm in the team, and I also have lived these scenarios enough to know, oh, so-and-so got a solo. Oh my gosh, drama this fall about solos. Never fails, right? Well, I thought that so-and-so should have gotten in. Right? Those sorts of silly things, but they're very real. These things are very real. So we have to then, if we know that that's coming, if we know complaining is coming, if we know competitive spirit is coming, if we anticipate these things at the outset, if we ask our community to come together and to say, hey, let's define what we expect out of each other, so that when things inevitably come up, we can face it. My child had an argument with a friend. It's girl stuff, you know. It starts so early. Oh my gosh, when we had our first instance in kindergarten, I thought, what? Already? But I said to her, and I truly believe this, that conflict resolved is a sign of relationships deepening. And so that sweet little baby told her friend that at 9 years old. And her friend's mom sent me a text, who's also a believer, and said, super cool to hear the kids saying these things, right? But we don't always remember it ourselves. That resolving of conflict deepens relationship. Healthy resolving, right? So important. So this is something that can be in the code of ethics. Gossiping. What do we do when there's gossiping? How do we respond to it? Those sorts of things, okay? And this is something that you can do with your teams. So you collectively define your expectations. Let's talk about low-hanging fruit. Tardiness to rehearsal. Someone who's perpetually late. A well-intentioned person who is really trying to do well, but just can't make it on time. How do you handle that? Ask your team, well, how do we handle that? What do we do? There's a leader that I have great respect for. Her name is Betsy Cook-Weber. She teaches at the University of Houston, or is just finished her career there. A sad loss to the collegiate world, a great gain to the professional world. She's leading her choir now. Her code of ethics, and this was not student created, she designed it, is that anybody who is 1 minute late for a trip, 1 minute to the bus, if you're there at 9:01, she takes that minute and multiplies it by how many people are in the ensemble, and you owe that many minutes of service. Now that's in a school setting where there's a power differential, and she can say, oh, 42 minutes of work for you. That motivates people because she believes, oh, you just wasted 1 minute of everyone's time. Now that may be a really harsh end, but she's defined the outcome, and so people are on time, right? Sometimes it's simply as people understanding we feel disrespected, or your teammates feel disrespected by that, right? There's room for understanding. I'm really talking about habitual patterns that we're facing. What are your core values? What are your core values? So what's the core value of your ministry team? What might be some words that you would utilize to describe that? Creative. Good. What else? What are, say that. Kindness. Say that again. Commitment. Respect. Humility. Say it again. Yes, good. Heart for others. Good. Excellence. Good. We'll talk about perfectionism, which is a real thing. but defining those core values and asking your team members, if you've never done something like this, an exercise like this can happen in the context of a retreat. So let's say you have a small brief retreat for your team, where you just define some of these things, and ask people to think about it. Perhaps they've never thought about approaching their artistry with humility. Maybe they've only approached it in thinking about excellence. But more importantly, is the humility. Define acceptable and unacceptable behaviors, right? So this is something as simple as commitment, being on time. What does it mean when someone's missing rehearsal? Like, what are your expectations for that? How do we handle those things? And you have to obviously predicate all of these things. These are just suggestions on your environment and what is going to be helpful to you. The coach should establish the level of commitment needed by all of the members. All right? And this is something to create. And in Rory's first book, he talks about writing it out, and he gives an example of a code in the first book to give you some sort of directives and points of departure to think about some of the things that you would want to include. Okay. Excellence versus perfectionism. Making sure that that's a priority and a value that we communicate on the regular, and liberating ourselves from the pursuit of perfection, and liberating our collaborators from the pursuit of perfection as an unrealistic aspiration that is impossible. There's no such thing as performance that is perfect. These are some of the signals of perfectionism. Focusing on the negative, minimizing the positive. I do that all the time when I leave a concert. If one thing goes wrong, that's all I think about. And I forget about the outpouring of beauty. That's a problem in my own life that I'm aware of. It doesn't mean I don't struggle with it. Polarizing thinking, okay? So measure work in extremes. It's either acceptable or unacceptable. Self-identity is rooted in artistry, not in our identity as children of God, created in His image. High and unrealistic expectations and a loss of joy. So here are some little suggestions. If any of you find yourself a perfectionist or no perfectionist, to savor the positive. Be kind to the artist within you. Look to God for your self-esteem. Let the Lord love you. Set realistic expectations. Recover the joy of being an artist. And seek excellence. So just a couple final thoughts in my last minute. Our ministry is the product of our relationship with Christ. And so our quiet time, our time in Scripture, our time in prayer is so essential as we are making difficult decisions as leaders that require us to do courageous things. And so I just want to encourage all of us that as we take this task on, that it is a worthy task, that it is what brings beauty to the lives of so many people in our congregations. And it's an enormous responsibility. But I hope that if any of you decide to develop a code of ethics, I would encourage you to get the book from Rory Noland, and let me know if it makes a difference in your environment as artist leaders. And thank you all so much for being such a welcoming community this week. This is my first time at the Alleluia conference, and it has been just a joy to work with all of you and to get to know you a bit. So thank you for sharing space. And if you want to learn about Fourscore, I'm happy to show you my iPad. So, all right, we're all done.